Look at these two tomato plants. Same seed, same soil, same water, same Lancaster County summer. One of them is standing tall right now, heavy with fruit, leaves clean, no holes, no curling, no aphids on the stems. The other one is what most American gardeners are looking at by late July: yellowed lower leaves, chewed edges, a handful of small tomatoes that never quite sized up, and a bottle of something orange or blue sitting in the dirt next to it that cost $14 and did not fix anything. The difference between those two plants is not a product. It is not a spray. It is a system. A set of decisions made before the pest ever showed up, not after. That system is what I want to walk you through today. My name is Abraham Yoder. My family has farmed the same ground in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, for 6 generations. My great-great-grandfather broke this soil before the Civil War. We have grown food through drought years and wet years, through aphid pressure and cabbage worm years, through seasons where every neighbor's garden looked like something chewed through it and ours came through clean. Not because we had something special from a store. Because we knew something about the way pests actually work, and we built the garden around that knowledge, the way you build a house around the way rain falls. Now, I want you to sit with this. What I am about to show you is not a trick in the sense that it is one clever thing. It is a system. 5 steps. Each one builds on the last. The whole thing takes about 1 afternoon to set up if you have a small garden, and maybe 1 full Saturday if your plot runs bigger. What you will end up with is a garden where pest pressure drops significantly season over season, not because you killed everything that came near it, but because you made it the wrong kind of place for pests to thrive. I have seen gardens go from heavy spray dependence to almost nothing in 2 seasons, using exactly this approach. I'm going to walk you through all 5 steps today. And I want to mention briefly that Esther and I put together the Amish home savings system, which goes deeper into how we manage the whole homestead on almost nothing from outside. That link is down in the description. Now let us get into it. The first thing I need you to understand, and this is the principle that changes everything, is that pest problems in a garden are almost never about the pest. That sounds wrong when you are standing there looking at your kale with holes in every leaf, or when the aphids have colonized the new growth on your pepper plants. It feels like the problem is the aphid, but the aphid is just the symptom. The problem is that your garden is sending a signal, and that signal is attracting pests. This is the piece the garden industry does not want you to sit with too long, because if you do, you stop buying their sprays. Here is how it works. A plant under stress releases certain compounds through its leaves and roots. Not in a mystical sense, in a chemical, biological sense that researchers have measured and documented. Insects, particularly pest insects, are extraordinarily sensitive to those stress compounds. A plant that is waterlogged, or nutrient imbalanced, or planted too close to the wrong neighbor, or sitting in compacted soil where its roots cannot breathe, that plant is broadcasting a signal that says, in the language of insects, here is a weak host. Come and feed. Aphids, whiteflies, cabbage moths, squash vine borers, they are not random. They are responding to information the plant is putting out. You can spray all you want. You can coat every leaf with something that costs $12 for 16 ounces. And as long as the underlying stress signal is still there, the pests will come back, sometimes the next day, sometimes the next week. But they will come back, because the signal is still broadcasting. My grandfather used to say the garden rewards the attentive and punishes the hopeful. What he meant was that hoping a plant would fight off its own problems without addressing the cause was not a strategy. It was wishful thinking dressed up in patience. A strong plant, one that is not stressed, one that has the right root environment and the right neighbors and the right soil biology underneath it, does not broadcast that stress signal. It is not invisible to pests, but it is not a beacon either. That is what we are building toward. A garden that is genuinely less attractive to the pests that destroy harvests, not because we chemically coated it, but because we changed what it is. Now let me walk you through the 5 steps. The first step is what we call border planting, and it is the oldest pest barrier I know of that costs almost nothing. The idea is simple. Before you put a single food plant in the ground, you ring your garden with a specific set of plants that pests avoid and that predatory insects love. This is not folklore. There is a biological mechanism here. Many of the plants we use as borders contain volatile oils, strong-smelling compounds that interfere with pest insects' ability to locate their preferred host plants. An aphid that is flying toward your pepper patch is using scent cues to navigate. Put a dense row of something that smells like strong herbs between the aphid and the pepper, and the navigation gets confused. The pest flies past without landing. The plants that work best for this, based on what we have grown in Lancaster County for generations, are marigolds, tansy, and strongly aromatic herbs. French marigolds, the small compact ones, not the giant African variety, are the ones you want. They contain a compound called alpha-terthionyl, which repels nematodes in the soil and deters aphids, whiteflies, and certain beetles above it. A flat of French marigold seedlings from a garden center right now runs somewhere between $4 and $6 for a dozen plants. You can also start them from seed for under $2 a packet. You need them on all four sides of your vegetable beds, planted 8 to 10 inches apart in a continuous row. The key error most people make is planting 2 or 3 marigolds in the corners and calling it done. That is decoration, not a barrier. You need a genuine continuous row. The smell has to form a wall, not a few isolated points. Alongside the marigolds, plant dill and basil if you are growing tomatoes, peppers, or squash nearby. Dill draws predatory wasps, not the stinging kind you worry about at a picnic, but small parasitic wasps that lay their eggs inside aphids and caterpillars, which kills them from the inside out. Those wasps are completely harmless to people and are among the most effective natural pest controls that exist. A packet of dill seed costs about $1.50. Let it go partially to flower, that is what draws the wasps in. Most gardeners cut it back before it flowers because it looks untidy. That is exactly the wrong thing to do. Tansy is worth mentioning separately because it is something almost no modern gardener plants, and it is extraordinary. It repels ants, and this matters more than most people realize. Ants are the reason your aphid problems get worse fast. Ants protect aphid colonies from ladybugs and lacewings because the ants are farming the aphids they eat, the sticky substance aphids produce called honeydew. Eliminate the ant presence around your aphid-affected plants, and the natural predators can do their job. Tansy does this reliably. You can start it from seed or buy a small plant for $3 to $4. It spreads by root over time, so plant it in a spot where it can have room to grow. Do not plant it inside the vegetable bed itself, because it will take over. Keep it on the perimeter. That is step 1. A living border that works 24 hours a day without any labor from you, that gets stronger over time as the plants establish, and that costs you somewhere between $8 and $15 total to set up for a typical backyard garden. Compare that to what you spend on spray in a season. The average American home gardener spends somewhere between $60 and $120 a year on pesticide products, according to market data on residential garden spending. Most of that is reactive bought after the problem appeared. The border is preventive. It does not let the problem start. Step 2 is soil coverage, and this one surprises people because it does not look like pest control. It looks like mulch. But here is what it is actually doing. A large number of garden pests, including squash bugs, cucumber beetles, and cutworms, overwinter in bare soil or lay their eggs in it. Bare soil exposed to the sun also dries out unevenly, which creates the root stress I mentioned earlier, which creates the stress signal that draws more pests. Covering the soil between your plants with 3 to 4 inches of straw mulch, wood chip mulch, or even dry leaves accomplishes several things at once. It retains moisture so the plants are not cycling through wet and dry stress. It suppresses weeds that would otherwise compete for nutrients and harbor pests. It creates habitat for ground beetles, which are predatory insects that eat pest eggs and larvae. And it disrupts the life cycle of the soil-dwelling pests that would otherwise climb straight up into your plants. Straw mulch at a feed store or farm supply runs about $8 to $12 for a large bale that will cover a typical garden bed generously. Do not use hay. Hay contains seed heads that will germinate and create a weed problem. Use straw. If you have access to wood chips from a tree service, many will drop them for free. We have taken truckloads at no charge over the years simply by asking. The mulch layer goes down after planting, not before. You need to give the soil time to warm up first in spring, especially in Pennsylvania, where cold soil in April will stunt transplants. Wait until your nighttime temperatures are consistently above 50 degrees, then put the mulch down. That is the timing most people miss. They mulch too early, the soil stays cold, the roots stay shallow, and the plant is stressed going into the heat of summer. Step 3 is companion planting within the bed, which is different from the border planting on the outside. This is about what you put next to each other inside the vegetable rows themselves. There are pairings that have been tested over generations and that work for measurable reasons. Tomatoes planted with basil do better against aphids and thrips. The basil's volatile oils interfere with the pest's ability to locate the tomatoes. Beans and squash planted together create a situation where the bean leaves confuse squash vine borers looking for their preferred host. Nasturtiums planted near the edge of your brassica beds act as trap crops. The aphids go to the nasturtiums instead of your cabbage and broccoli, and then you can deal with them on one plant rather than across the whole bed. Nasturtium seeds cost under $2 a packet, and they are bulletproof to grow. Even in a dry summer, they push through. The error most gardeners make with companion planting is treating it like a decoration choice rather than a functional layout decision. They put one basil plant somewhere in the general vicinity of the tomatoes. For this to work, you need basil plants at regular intervals throughout the tomato row, roughly every 2 to 3 feet. The volatile oil concentration in the air around the tomatoes has to be meaningful. One plant 20 feet away is not doing that. 6 plants distributed throughout a 12-foot row, that is a different situation entirely. And then there is the most misunderstood companion pairing of all, which is the 3 sisters. Corn, beans, and squash, grown together the way native farmers and early American settlers both knew to do. The corn grows tall and gives the beans something to climb. The beans fix nitrogen in the soil that feeds the corn and squash. The squash leaves spread wide along the ground and shade out weeds and retain moisture. And the whole combination creates a complex enough plant environment that pest insects have a genuinely harder time navigating to their preferred host. A field of single crop corn is a beacon for corn earworm. A mixed planting is confusing in ways that reduce that pressure. We still grow the 3 sisters in one section of the garden every year. It costs nothing extra. It is just a layout decision. Step 4 is what we call the diatomaceous earth line, and this is the one physical barrier that we actually apply. Diatomaceous earth is a fine powder made from the fossilized remains of microscopic aquatic organisms. It has the texture of talcum powder to your hand, but under magnification its particles are razor sharp. When soft-bodied insects, slugs, aphids, beetles, cutworms crawl through it, it cuts into their exoskeletons and they dehydrate and die. It does not work by poisoning. It works physically. That means insects cannot develop resistance to it the way they develop resistance to chemical pesticides. A 4-pound bag of food-grade diatomaceous earth costs between $10 and $16 at a farm supply or hardware store and will last you multiple seasons if stored dry. The application protocol matters, and getting it wrong reduces the effectiveness significantly. You apply it in a ring around the base of vulnerable plants, particularly squash, cucumber, eggplant, and brassicas, which are the plants most heavily hit by soil-dwelling beetles and crawling pests. The ring needs to be about 2 inches wide and unbroken. You do this in the morning when there is still some moisture on the soil to help the powder adhere, and you do it after you have finished watering, not before. The critical thing that most people get wrong is reapplying after rain. Diatomaceous earth washes away and loses effectiveness when wet. After any meaningful rain, and in Pennsylvania we can get soaking summer thunderstorms that come fast, you need to reapply. If you apply it once and walk away, you will have 3 good days and then nothing. The honest warning with diatomaceous earth is this: apply it in the morning or evening, and be careful around flowering plants when bees are active. It can harm bees that walk through it. I am not going to pretend otherwise. Apply it to the soil around the base of the plant, not to the flowers or the open blooms. Used correctly on the soil surface, around the stems, not on the flowers, it is not a meaningful threat to your pollinators. Used carelessly, broadcast over everything, it can cause harm. So use it with precision, not generosity. A thin, targeted ring, not a general coating of the whole bed. That is the 4th step. And I want to say that the combination of steps 1 through 4, the border plants, the soil coverage, the companion planting, and the physical diatomaceous earth barrier already puts you in a very different position than most home gardeners in America. Most people are working reactively. They see the pest, they buy the spray, they apply it, they wait, the pest returns. This system is working ahead of the pest. It is removing the conditions that allow pest populations to build in the first place. That is a fundamentally different approach, and it shows up in the harvest numbers. I have talked to gardeners who have switched to this approach and seen their pest-related losses drop by 50–60% in the first season. Not because everything becomes perfect, but because you have removed the easiest conditions for pests to exploit. Now, before I get to the 5th step, which is the one that surprises people the most, the one that most modern gardeners never do, and that old-time growers always did, I want to tell you about something Esther and I put together. It is called the Amish Home Savings System, and it is a full guide to how we run the homestead on almost nothing from outside food, preserving, energy use, the whole picture. If any part of what I am talking about today connects with you, that resource goes deeper. The link is in the description below this video. Now, step 5, and this is the one I want you to really think about. because it runs against almost everything modern gardening culture tells you to do. Stop tidying your garden beds in the fall. I mean this literally. The practice of clearing everything out in October, cutting down all the spent plants, raking everything clean, leaving bare naked soil going into winter, is one of the single most pest-friendly things you can do, and the garden industry benefits from it because it resets the conditions that require you to buy more product the following spring. When you clear your garden beds completely and leave bare soil over winter, you remove the habitat for ground beetles and spiders and parasitic wasps that overwinter in plant debris and loose mulch. Those are your allies. They are what keeps the pest population from exploding the following spring. Without them, you start the new season with abundant pests and no predators, and the spray companies are ready and waiting for you in March. What we do instead is what farmers in this region did for a very long time before the age of tidy gardens. We leave the structural remains of the plants, the thick stems of tomatoes and peppers and corn, in place until spring. We do not leave diseased material. Anything that showed signs of blight or fungal infection during the season gets pulled and composted away from the garden. But clean plant material, the stems and canes and stalks of healthy plants, those stay. We cover them with a 4-inch layer of compost and leaves. That layered debris becomes overwintering habitat for dozens of beneficial insect species. The ground beetles that eat cutworm eggs, the lacewing larvae that eat aphid eggs, the parasitic wasps that will be patrolling your garden in May. I have measured this in a rough way over many years. In the sections of our garden where we leave the winter cover intact and let the beneficial insects overwinter undisturbed, we see meaningful aphid pressure by late June, only in bad years. In the sections where we do a full fall cleanup, which we sometimes do for crop rotation reasons, we almost always see earlier and heavier pest pressure the following spring. This tracks exactly with what researchers who study beneficial insect populations have documented. The beneficial insect community in a garden is not something you can turn on and off quickly. It takes time to establish. If you reset it every fall, you start over every spring. Now, I want to be clear about something. This does not mean you leave diseased plants in place. It does not mean you ignore fallen fruit that harbors larvae. It means you make a distinction between the material that supports beneficial insects and the material that harbors problems, and you manage those two things differently. It takes judgment that you develop over a season or two. You learn to recognize what healthy spent plant material looks like versus what diseased plant material looks like. Once you can see the difference, this practice becomes second nature. And there is one more dimension to this final step that most people overlook. When you leave winter cover on the garden beds, you protect the soil microbial community. The fungi and bacteria in the top 2 inches of soil, the community of living organisms that does the real work of making nutrients available to your plants, are sensitive to freeze-thaw cycles. Bare soil exposed to hard Pennsylvania winters loses a meaningful portion of that community every year. Covered soil holds onto it. The spring planting goes into a warmer, biologically richer environment, and the plants establish faster, with stronger root systems, which means they are broadcasting less stress signal from the start, which means the pests have less reason to concentrate on your plants. Every part of this system is connected. Now let me tell you who profits from you not knowing any of this. Not to rile you, just so you see the shape of the thing. The American residential pesticide market sprays, granules, systemic treatments for home gardens and lawns runs to several $billion a year in consumer spending. The companies that sell those products have no financial incentive to tell you that companion planting, mulch, and overwintering debris can replace most of what they sell. They are not conspiring in a back room. No one had to plan this. It is simply that the products which create repeat customers are more valuable than the knowledge that creates independence. A bottle of pyrethrin spray for $12 that you buy 4 times a season is a better business than a 40-cent packet of French Marigold seeds that you start yourself from seed and plant once. A bag of systemic pesticide granules for $22 that you apply every 6 weeks because the pest pressure keeps returning is a better business than the understanding that the pest pressure keeps returning because the soil is stressed and the beneficial insect community has been disrupted. I am not telling you a man schemed this in a back room. No one had to. It is worse than a conspiracy because it is a system nobody had to coordinate. It simply pays better to sell a product that leaves the garden dependent than to teach a man to build a garden that takes care of itself. A garden that builds beneficial insect populations, that uses the soil's own biology, that gets stronger every year instead of weaker, that garden buys less from the store every season. That is not good for the industry's numbers, but it is very good for yours. Think about what the average American home gardener spends on pest control over 5 years. If you are buying reactive sprays, the pyrethrin, the neem oil in the ready-to-use bottle at $14 per quart, the systemic granules, the copper fungicide for the blight that comes. Because the plant was already stressed, you are easily spending $80 to $100 a season on garden chemicals in a moderately sized home garden. Over 5 years, that is $400 to $500. And at the end of 5 years, if you have been relying on those inputs, is your soil better? Is your pest pressure lower? Or does it feel like you have been running to stand still? The system I have described today costs you somewhere between $20 and $30 in the first year. The marigold seedlings, a bale of straw, the diatomaceous earth, a few seed packets. In the second year, if you saved your marigold seeds, which takes about 3 minutes at the end of the season, and if you kept your diatomaceous earth bag dry in the shed, you are spending almost nothing. The system compounds. The soil improves. The beneficial insect population grows. The pest pressure goes down. That is the opposite direction from what happens under spray dependence. My grandfather grew food on this land for 50 years without buying a pesticide product. Not because those products did not exist by his later years, they did, but because he understood that buying them was an admission that something in the system had broken down, and that the right response to a broken system was to fix it, not to buy a product that masked the symptom. He fixed it by paying attention to the soil, by keeping his plant communities diverse, by leaving the garden covered in winter, by planting borders that worked for him year-round. He was not a wise man because he read about these things. He was a wise man because he watched what worked across decades and trusted what he saw. So, here is what I want you to do this week. If you have an existing garden that is already planted this season, start with step 1, go to a garden center and pick up a flat of French marigolds, $6 to $8, and plant them in a continuous row around the outside of your vegetable beds. That is one afternoon. It is the fastest intervention you can make right now. While you are at the garden center, pick up a packet of nasturtium seeds, about $1.50, and plant them near your brassicas or along any edge where you tend to see aphid pressure. Then buy 1 bag of food-grade diatomaceous earth, around $12, and apply a ring around the base of your squash, cucumber, and eggplant plants this week. Total outlay, under $20. Total time, 1 afternoon. If you are planning for next season, start in September when you clear the garden. Do not clear it all the way down to bare soil. Leave the structural material from healthy plants. Cover the whole bed with 3 to 4 inches of compost and leaves, and let it sit through winter. Come spring, you will plant into a warmer, richer, more biologically active soil with a resident population of beneficial insects that has been building all winter. And then lay out your companion planting before you put the first transplant in the ground. Know where the marigold border goes. Know which beds will have nasturtiums as trap crops. Know where the dill will go that you will let go to flower for the parasitic wasps. Make it a map, not an afterthought. I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me what your biggest pest problem is in your garden this year. Tell me what region you are in, because a gardener in Georgia is dealing with different pressure than someone in Minnesota, and I want to give you specific answers when I can. Tell me what you have already tried and what has not worked. I read every one of these. I will tell you what I know. Next week, I want to talk about soil itself, specifically about the difference between what happens to garden soil that has been fed with synthetic fertilizers for 5 or 10 years versus soil that has been managed with organic matter and cover crops. The numbers are real, and they are not what the fertilizer companies want you to think about. If the pest system we talked about today made sense to you, the soil conversation is going to click into place in a way that changes how you see the whole garden. My grandfather used to say that a man who tends the same ground for 30 years is a tree called farming the same land he started with. He is either farming something richer or something poorer, and which one it is depends entirely on what he chose to pay attention to along the way. Pay attention to the right things. The land will tell you what it needs if you give it enough quiet to speak. That is what 6 generations of farming this county have taught us, and it is what I am passing on to you now.